The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry when the locks to the penthouse were changed. One moment, she was the envy of New York's elite, the wife of tech mogul Arthur Pendleton. The next, she was standing on the rain-slicked pavement of Fifth Avenue, 7 months pregnant, clutching a garbage bag filled with her clothes, while her husband's mistress, the rising starlet Candace Vane, watched from the balcony above. They thought they had discarded a penniless orphan. They thought she was weak. But Arthur didn't check her birth certificate closely enough. He didn't know that the woman he just threw away wasn't just Bella the charity worker. She was the sole heiress to the sterling steel dynasty, a fortune that could buy and sell his company 10 times over. And she wasn't just sad. She was ready for war. The silence in the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue was usually comforting, a testament to the soundproofing money could buy. Tonight, however, it felt suffocating. Isabella Pendleton sat on the edge of the cream-colored Italian leather sofa, her hands resting protectively over the distinct swell of her belly. She was 28 weeks along, and the baby was kicking, a rhythmic reminder of the life she and Arthur had promised to nurture together. But the man standing across from her wasn't the Arthur she had married 3 years ago. That Arthur had been charming, ambitious, and seemingly kind. The man pacing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, silhouetted against the glittering Manhattan skyline, was a stranger. "It's done, Bella," Arthur said, his voice devoid of emotion. He tossed a thick manila envelope onto the marble coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud that echoed in the cavernous room. "My lawyers drew it up this morning. Irreconcilable differences. I'm being generous with the settlement, considering you brought nothing into this marriage." Isabella stared at the envelope. She didn't reach for it. "Arthur, we're having a son in 3 months. You're ending our marriage now?" Arthur stopped pacing and turned to her. His suit was impeccable, a bespoke Tom Ford that cost more than most people earned in a year. He adjusted his cufflinks, avoiding her eyes. "The timing isn't ideal, I admit. But my publicist agrees that a clean break is better before the baby arrives. It complicates the branding if we wait." "Branding?" Isabella whispered, the blood draining from her face. "This is our family, Arthur, not a product launch." "It's all business, Bella." "You know that." A new voice chimed in. Isabella froze. She watched as the door to the master bedroom opened. Candace Vane, the it girl of the moment, sauntered out. She was wearing nothing but Arthur's silk robe, the one Isabella had bought him for their 2nd anniversary. Candace looked exactly like she did on the magazine covers. Flawless skin, cascading blonde hair, and a smile that didn't quite reach her predatory eyes. "Candace and we have a connection," Arthur said, finally looking at Isabella. "She understands the industry. She understands the pressure. You've always been too domestic, Bella. Too quiet. I need a power couple image. Candace gives me that." Isabella stood up slowly, her legs trembling. The betrayal wasn't just sharp, it was blunt force trauma. "You're divorcing me for her? She's been in the tabloids more times than she's been in movies, Arthur." "Watch it," Candace snapped, pouring herself a glass of water from the crystal pitcher on the bar cart. "Arthur needs a woman who shines, not a mouse who hides in the nursery. Besides, we're in love. Aren't we, darling?" Arthur nodded, walking over to wrap an arm around Candace's waist. The sight made bile rise in Isabella's throat. "Sign the papers, Bella. The settlement gives you enough to rent a decent place in Queens or Jersey. Maybe even start a little bakery like you always wanted. But you need to leave. Tonight." "Tonight?" Isabella asked, her voice hardening. The shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a cold, dull ache. "I'm pregnant, Arthur. It's freezing outside." I booked you an Uber, Arthur said dismissively, checking his Rolex, a submariner that she knew he hadn't wound in days. It's waiting downstairs. Don't make a scene. The doorman has instructions to escort you out if you're not gone in 20 minutes. Isabella looked at the man she had loved. She looked at the woman smirking in her husband's arms. She realized then that pleading would get her nothing but pity, and she refused to be pitied by these people. She didn't scream. She didn't throw a vase. She simply walked past the divorce papers on the table. I don't want your settlement, Arthur, she said quietly. Arthur laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Don't be dramatic. You have no money. You have no family. You're an orphan from Ohio, remember? You need my money. Isabella paused at the door. She turned back, her hand on the brass handle. I remember exactly who I am. I just forgot for a while. She walked out, leaving the envelope untouched on the table. The wind on 57th Street whipped through Isabella's coat as if it were made of paper. She had grabbed only her essentials, her phone, her wallet, and a small duffel bag she used for prenatal yoga. The doorman, a kind man named Henry, who had always tipped his hat to her, couldn't even look her in the eye as he held the door open. He knew. Everyone in the building probably knew before she did. She sat on a bench near Central Park, watching the taillights of taxis streak by like red ribbons in the rain. She checked her bank account on her phone. $340. That was what she had in her personal checking account. Arthur had always insisted on managing the finances, giving her a generous allowance on a credit card that she knew would be cancelled by morning. Her phone buzzed, a text from Arthur. I see you left the papers. I'll have them couriered to whatever motel you end up in. Don't be stupid, Bella. Take the money. She deleted the message. The cold was seeping into her bones, and she felt a sharp cramp in her lower abdomen. Instinctively, she rubbed her belly. I'm sorry, little one, she whispered. I'm so sorry I chose him. She needed a plan. She couldn't stay in a hotel in the city. The prices would drain her funds in 2 nights. She needed to go home. Not the lie she had told Arthur, that she was a poor orphan from a no-name town in Ohio, but her real home. She scrolled through her contacts, past the socialites who only tolerated her because of Arthur, past the charity organizers who only called when they needed a check. She scrolled all the way to the bottom, to a number she hadn't dialed in 5 years. The contact name was simply the chairman. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Calling this number meant admitting defeat. It meant admitting she had been wrong to run away from her destiny, wrong to think she could live a simple life and find love for who she was, not for what she was worth. She pressed call. It rang once, twice. Then a gruff, gravelly voice answered, a voice that commanded boardrooms in London, Tokyo, and New York. This line is for emergencies only, the voice said. Speak. Isabella swallowed the lump in her throat. Tears finally began to spill, hot and fast against her freezing cheeks. Daddy! There was a silence on the other end, a silence so heavy it felt like the line had gone dead. Then the voice softened, losing its metallic edge. Isabella, is that you? Mouse? Daddy, She choked on a sob. I made a mistake. I'm alone. I'm cold. And you're going to be a grandfather. The sound of a chair scraping against a floor echoed through the phone. Where are you? Conrad Sterling demanded. His voice was no longer that of the ruthless CEO of Sterling Steel. It was the voice of a father who had found his lost child. 5th Avenue, near the park. Stay there, Conrad commanded. Do not move. I am in Zurich, but I have a security team at the plaza. They will be there in 3 minutes. They will take you to the jet. I don't have anything, Daddy. I left everything. You have everything, Isabella, Conrad said firmly. "You are a sterling. And whoever did this to you, whoever made my daughter cry on a street corner, they will burn. Do you understand me? They will burn." As the call ended, a sleek black SUV with tinted windows screeched to a halt at the curb. Two large men in dark suits jumped out, umbrellas already open. "Ms. Sterling?" one of them asked, shielding her from the rain. Ms. Sterling. She hadn't heard that name in years. She looked up at the penthouse one last time, where the lights were warm and golden, where Arthur was likely pouring champagne for Candace. "Yes," she said, stepping into the dry warmth of the car. "That's me." The flight to the Sterling estate in the Swiss Alps was a blur of medical checkups and sleeping. When Isabella woke, she wasn't in a sterile penthouse. She was in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by oak paneling and the smell of pine and snow. Conrad Sterling was sitting in the armchair by the fire. He looked older than she remembered. His hair was completely white now, and there were deeper lines etched around his eyes, but his presence was as formidable as ever. He was reading a report, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "The doctors say the baby is healthy," Conrad said without looking up. "A boy. Strong heart." "He's a fighter," Isabella said, sitting up. "Like his mother." Conrad finally looked at her. He closed the folder. "His mother ran away, Isabella. She tried to play house with a man who didn't deserve to polish her shoes. I wanted to be loved for me, Dad. Not for the steel mills, not for the billions." "And did he love you?" Conrad asked gently. Isabella looked down at her hands. "He loved the idea of me, until a shinier idea came along." Conrad stood up and walked over to the bed. He placed a hand on hers. "You have grieved enough. You have cried enough. Now we plan. Tell me everything. Who is he?" "Arthur Pendleton. Pendleton Tech." Conrad scoffed. "Pendleton? That mid-tier app developer? I could crush his stock price before breakfast." "No," Isabella said, a sudden fire igniting in her eyes. "No, Dad. I don't want you to crush him." "Then what do you want?" "I want to do it," she said. "He thinks I'm a nobody. He thinks I'm destitute. He's planning to launch his new flagship AI project, Nexus, next month. He needs raw materials for the hardware. He needs global distribution. He needs steel." Conrad smiled. It was a terrifying smile, the one he wore right before a hostile takeover. "He needs sterling steel." "Exactly," Isabella said. "I want to return to New York, but not as Isabella Pendleton, the discarded housewife. I want to return as Isabella Sterling, the Vice President of Global Operations. I want to sit across the negotiation table from him. I want to look him in the eye while he begs for a contract, and I want him to realize exactly who he threw away." "It will take work," Conrad warned. "You have been out of the game for 5 years. You are pregnant. The sharks on Wall Street will smell blood." "Let them bite," Isabella said, swinging her legs out of bed. "They'll break their teeth." 3 months later. The transformation was grueling. While other expectant mothers were painting nurseries, Isabella was studying market trends, analyzing supply chains, and relearning the ruthless art of corporate warfare. She traded her soft cardigans for tailored maternity suits from Chanel and Dior. She cut her hair into a sharp, angular bob that framed her face. On the day her son, Leo, was born, she was reviewing contracts between contractions. When she held him for the first time, she whispered a promise into his soft, dark hair. "Your father thought we were weak, Leo. We're going to show him what power really looks like." 6 weeks after the birth, Isabella was ready. The Sterling Group had quietly acquired a controlling interest in the logistics firms that Pendleton Tech relied on. They had squeezed the supply chain just enough to make Arthur desperate. Arthur was currently in panic mode. The news reports, which Isabella watched from her office in the newly constructed Sterling Tower in Manhattan, showed a frazzled Arthur Pendleton trying to explain delays in the Nexus launch. "We are experiencing minor supply chain hiccups," Arthur told the reporters, wiping sweat from his brow. Candace stood behind him, looking bored and checking her phone. "But we are close to securing a partnership with a major supplier that will solve everything." He didn't know the supplier was his ex-wife. Isabella pressed the intercom button on her desk. "Margaret?" "Yes, Miss Sterling?" "Send the invitation to Pendleton Tech. Tell Mr. Pendleton that the Sterling Group is willing to discuss a partnership. Set the meeting for the annual industrial gala next week." "And should I mention who the CEO will be meeting with?" "No," Isabella said, leaning back in her chair and swiveling to look out at the city she now owned. "Just tell him he'll be meeting with the heiress. Let him think he's about to charm some old money socialite." The trap was set. 2 days before the annual industrial gala, the atmosphere inside the executive suite of Pendleton Tech was toxic. Arthur Pendleton stood over the desk of his CFO, Grant Miller, watching the red lines on the monitors dip lower. "Explain this to me again, Grant," Arthur growled, slamming his hand onto the mahogany surface. "Why are our suppliers in Taiwan ghosting us? We have a contract." Grant, a man who had aged 10 years in the last 10 weeks, adjusted his glasses nervously. "It's not just Taiwan, Arthur. It's the shipping logistics. A holding company called Lionheart Global bought out our primary freight partners last week. They've deprioritized our shipments. They claim capacity issues, but it feels targeted. Without that steel for the server racks, the Nexus launch is dead in the water." "Fix it," Arthur snapped. "I don't care what it costs. Throw money at them." "We don't have the money, Arthur," Grant said quietly. "The divorce settlement, the rebranding for Candace, the new penthouse. Cash flow is negative. We need the Sterling Group investment. If we don't close that deal at the gala on Saturday, the board is going to vote for a leadership change." Arthur loosened his tie, feeling the walls closing in. "The Sterling Group will sign. I'm Arthur Pendleton. I'm a visionary. They need my tech as much as I need their capital." He stormed out of the office, needing a drink, only to run into Candace in the hallway. She was screaming into her phone, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the leather case. "What do you mean, declined?" she shrieked. "It's a black card. Run it again." She noticed Arthur and hung up, her face a mask of fury. "Arthur, the jeweler just embarrassed me in front of the paparazzi. They said your card was declined. Do you know what that does to my image?" "Lower your voice," Arthur hissed, grabbing her arm and pulling her into his office. "We are having a temporary liquidity issue. It will be resolved on Saturday." Candace pulled her arm away, smoothing her red silk dress. "It better be. I didn't leave my director boyfriend for a broke tech bro. The tabloids are already calling me a home wrecker. If you turn out to be a failure too, I'm finished." "I am not a failure," Arthur shouted, his face reddening. "I built this company from nothing, and I got rid of the one thing holding me back, Isabella. She was a weight, dragging me down into mediocrity. With her gone, I'm free to make the big moves. Saturday is the big move." Candace rolled her eyes, pouring herself a drink from his private stash. "Just make sure you charm this Sterling heiress. I heard she's some European old money prude. Probably ugly. Flirt with her. Promise her whatever she wants. Get the check, and let's go to St. Bart's." Meanwhile, at the Sterling estate on Long Island, Isabella stood in front of a full-length mirror. The woman staring back was unrecognizable from the Isabella of 3 months ago. The soft, flowy maternity clothes were gone. In their place, she wore a custom-designed gown by Versace, midnight blue velvet that hugged her post-pregnancy curves with a slit that went up to her mid-thigh. It was elegant, powerful, and dangerous. Around her neck sat the sterling star, a 40-carat sapphire necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. It was worth more than the entire penthouse Arthur had kicked her out of. "You look like a queen going to an execution," Conrad said, leaning against the doorframe, holding a glass of scotch. Isabella adjusted the diamond clasp. "Not an execution, Dad. A corporate restructuring." "Are you ready to see him?" Conrad asked, his voice serious. "It hasn't been that long. The emotions, they can be treacherous." Isabella turned to face her father. Her eyes were dry and clear. "I spent 3 years trying to be the wife he wanted. I cooked his meals, I ironed his shirts, I listened to his pitches. And when I was carrying his child, he threw me out like garbage because he wanted a trophy. I don't feel love, Dad. I don't even feel hate. I feel business." "Good," Conrad nodded. "The nanny is set with Leo. The security team is prepped. The car is waiting. Tonight, New York meets Isabella Sterling. And Arthur Pendleton meets his end," she whispered, picking up her clutch. Inside was not just lipstick, but a USB drive containing forensic accounting of Pendleton Tech's supply chain, the evidence she needed to prove his company was overvalued and vulnerable. She walked down the grand staircase, the heels of her Louboutins clicking like the ticking of a clock. Time was up. The Pierre Hotel ballroom was a sea of tuxedos, designer gowns, and flashing cameras. This was the event of the season, the annual industrial gala, where old money met new tech, where mergers were whispered over champagne and empires were built on handshakes. Arthur arrived with Candice on his arm. Candice worked the red carpet aggressively, posing for the photographers and flashing a dazzling smile that didn't reach her eyes. Arthur, however, was sweating. He scanned the room, ignoring the questions from the press about his delayed product launch. "Stick to the script," Arthur whispered to Candice as they entered the ballroom. "Smile, nod, and don't drink too much. We need to find the Sterling table." "I need a drink," Candice muttered. "These people are boring. Where is this heiress? I bet she's in a corner wearing a potato sack." They navigated through the crowd. Arthur was stopped by a few acquaintances, but their greetings were cool. The rumors of his financial trouble were spreading. He needed this meeting to happen now. He spotted the table near the front, prime real estate. The placard read, "The Sterling Group." It was empty, save for 3 large men in suits who looked more like Secret Service agents than gala guests. "Excuse me," Arthur said, approaching the head of security. "I'm Arthur Pendleton. I have a meeting scheduled with the Vice President of Operations." The guard looked him up and down, unimpressed. "Ms. Sterling will be here shortly. Please wait." "Ms. Sterling?" Arthur raised an eyebrow. "I thought I was meeting a representative." "Ms. Sterling is the representative," the guard said, turning away. Arthur adjusted his tie, his nerves jingling. "See," he told Candice, "a direct line to the family. This is better than I thought." Suddenly, the room went quiet. The chatter died down, starting from the entrance and rippling forward like a wave. The flashbulbs from the foyer went off in a blinding staccato frenzy. "What's happening?" Candice asked, standing on her tiptoes. "Is it a Kardashian?" The double doors swung open. Isabella walked in. She didn't walk. She glided. The midnight blue gown shimmered under the chandeliers. Her hair was sleek and sharp. Her makeup was flawless, highlighting her high cheekbones and piercing eyes. She looked regal, untouchable, and utterly magnificent. She was flanked by her father, Conrad Sterling, the legendary Iron Wolf of industry, but all eyes were on her. Arthur squinted. The woman looked familiar. The walk, the shape of her jaw. But it couldn't be. That woman was destitute. That woman was pregnant and homeless. That woman was Bella. This woman was a goddess. "Who is that?" Candace asked, her voice laced with sudden, sharp jealousy. As Isabella moved through the crowd, people parted for her. CEOs of Fortune 500 companies bowed their heads. Socialites who had ignored Bella Pendleton were now clamoring to catch Isabella Sterling's eye. She walked straight toward the Sterling table, straight toward Arthur. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. His mouth went dry. As she got closer, the denial in his brain began to shatter. Isabella stopped 3 feet away from him. She looked at him with a cool, detached amusement, as if he were a particularly dull piece of modern art. "Hello, Arthur," she said. Her voice was the same, soft, melodic, but it carried a weight of authority it never had before. Arthur stumbled back a step, bumping into a waiter. "Bella?" "But how?" "It's Isabella," she corrected him calmly. "Isabella Sterling." The silence at their end of the room was deafening. Candace dropped her clutch, her jaw hung open, her eyes darting between Arthur and the woman she had helped evict. "Sterling?" Arthur choked out. You're the heiress? But you said you were from Ohio. You said you had nothing." "I said I was from Ohio because I was born there while my father was overseeing a steel merger," Isabella said, a faint smile playing on her lips. "And I never said I had nothing, Arthur. I said I wanted a simple life. I wanted to build something with you. But you didn't want a partner. You wanted a prop." Arthur looked around. People were watching. Investors were watching. He tried to salvage the situation, switching instantly into sales mode, though his voice trembled. Isabella. This is a wonderful surprise. I had no idea. If you had known I was worth $40 billion, you wouldn't have divorced me?" Isabella finished for him, her voice cutting like a razor. "You wouldn't have thrown me out on the street while I was carrying your son." Gasps rippled through the nearby crowd. The phrase $40 billion seemed to hang in the air. "Son?" Arthur whispered. "The baby?" "Leo is safe," Isabella said coldly. "He is at home, my home, the one you will never step foot in." Candace, realizing her position was rapidly disintegrating, stepped forward, trying to regain control. "Look, honey," she sneered, though her voice wavered. "Good for you. You found a sugar daddy to adopt you. But Arthur is here for business. We have a meeting with the Sterling Group. So unless you're going to fetch us drinks, get out of the way." Conrad Sterling stepped forward from behind Isabella. His presence was terrifying. He looked at Candace as if she were a stain on the carpet. "Young woman," Conrad rumbled, "this is my daughter, and she is the Sterling Group." Candace went pale. She shrank back behind Arthur. Isabella didn't even look at Candace. Her gaze remained fixed on Arthur. "You wanted a meeting, Arthur. You wanted to discuss the supply of high-grade steel for the Nexus project. Well, here I am. Pitch me." Arthur stammered. "Bella, please, can we talk in private? There's been a misunderstanding. I still love you. The divorce, it was a mistake. I was stressed. Candace meant nothing." "Hey!" Candace squawked, grabbing his arm. Arthur shook her off violently. "Shut up! Bella, look at me. We have a history. We have a child. We can fix this. We can be the power couple I always talked about. Imagine it. Pendleton Tech and Sterling Steel. We would rule the world." Isabella laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You still don't get it. You think this is a negotiation for reconciliation. It's not." She signaled to one of her aides, who handed her a tablet. She tapped the screen and held it up for Arthur to see. "This is the current status of your Series B funding," Isabella said, her voice projecting clearly so the surrounding investors could hear. "And this is your supply chain report. You're insolvent, Arthur. You've been cooking the books to hide the logistics costs. You're not here to make a deal. You're here to beg for a bailout." Arthur's face turned grey. "That's confidential information. That's corporate espionage." "It's due diligence," Isabella countered. "And as of this morning, Sterling Group has acquired the debt notes for Pendleton Tech, which means, Arthur, I don't just supply your steel." She stepped closer, leaning in so only he could hear the final blow, though the microphone on the podium nearby picked up the chill in her voice. "I own your loans. I own your debt. And if you don't pay me in full by Monday morning, I own your company." Arthur looked at her, his eyes wide with terror. The confident tech mogul was gone. In his place was a man watching his life turn to ash. "You can't do this," he whispered. "I can," Isabella said, turning her back on him. "And I will. Enjoy the party, Arthur. It's the last one you'll be invited to." She took her father's arm and walked away, leaving Arthur Pendleton standing in the center of the ballroom, alone, exposed, and utterly destroyed, as the flashing cameras captured every second of his humiliation. The Monday morning following the gala was a bloodbath on Wall Street for Pendleton Tech. The image of Arthur Pendleton, pale and trembling before the imposing figure of Isabella Sterling, had been splashed across every financial newspaper and tabloid from New York to London. The headline of the New York Post was brutal in its simplicity: "Steel curtain falls on Pendleton." Inside the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue, the air was thick with panic. Arthur was pacing the living room, his phone glued to his ear, shouting at his legal team. "What do you mean there's nothing we can do? I'm the founder. You can't just let us seize the assets," Arthur screamed. He listened for a moment, then threw the phone against the wall. It shattered, a fitting metaphor for his life. "They're calling in the loans," Arthur muttered to the empty room. "All of them. Immediately." He turned to find Candace dragging 2 large Louis Vuitton suitcases out of the bedroom. She wasn't wearing the silk robe anymore. She was dressed in jeans, a leather jacket, and oversized sunglasses, looking ready to flee a crime scene. "Where are you going?" Arthur asked, his voice cracking. Candace didn't even look at him. She struggled with the zipper of the bag. "I'm going to stay at the Soho house. My agent says I need to distance myself from this toxic fallout. You're radioactive, Arthur." "Radioactive?" Arthur laughed hysterically. "You're the reason I did this. I divorced Bella for you. I bought this apartment for you. You divorced her because you're greedy." Candace spat back, finally locking eyes with him. "And you bought this apartment on credit. Credit you don't have anymore." She grabbed the handle of her suitcase. "By the way, I'm taking the jewelry. Consider it severance pay for the embarrassment of dating the world's biggest loser." "You can't take that!" Arthur lunged for her, grabbing her wrist. "Get off me!" Candace shrieked. Suddenly the front door burst open. It wasn't the police. It was worse. It was a team of 4 men in grey jumpsuits, led by a woman holding a clipboard. Behind them stood 2 uniformed officers. "Mr. Pendleton," the woman said briskly, "I'm the asset liquidation officer appointed by the creditor, Sterling Global Holdings. We are here to secure the premises." Arthur let go of Candace, who stumbled back. "You can't just walk in here." "Actually, we can," the officer said. "According to the terms of your defaulted loan, the property and all contents purchased with company funds are now collateral. That includes the furniture, the art, and—" She pointed to Candace's wrist. "The diamond bracelet Ms. Vane is wearing. It was purchased on the corporate account 3 months ago." Candace gasped, clutching her wrist. "This is mine. It was a gift." "It's company property," the officer said calmly. "Hand it over, or we will have the officers arrest you for grand larceny." Arthur watched in horror as Candace, cursing and crying, was forced to strip off the jewelry he had given her. She threw the bracelet at the officer, then turned to Arthur with a look of pure hatred. "I hope you rot," she hissed. She grabbed her bags and stormed out, pushing past the liquidation team. Arthur was left alone in the center of the room as the movers began tagging the furniture with red stickers. His life was being disassembled piece by piece. His phone, the one he had thrown, buzzed on the floor. The screen was cracked, but he could see the caller ID. It was his mother. He ignored it. He sank onto the floor, pulling his knees to his chest. He had traded a loyal wife and a child for a woman who just left him for a bracelet. 2 hours later, he was escorted out of the building. He had nothing but the clothes on his back and a box of personal files. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, a black limousine pulled up. The back window rolled down. It was Isabella. She looked at him, her face unreadable behind dark sunglasses. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. "Get in," she said. Arthur hesitated, then opened the door and slid into the leather seat. He expected her to yell. He expected her to laugh. "Why?" Arthur whispered. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me think you were poor?" Isabella took off her glasses. Her eyes were sad, but clear. "Because I wanted to know if you loved me, Arthur. Not the money. Not the name. Just me. And I got my answer. I made a mistake," Arthur sobbed, the fight finally leaving him. "I was stupid. I was weak. Please, Bella, I've lost everything. The company, the house, Candace. I have nothing." "You have your health," Isabella said coldly, "and you have the skills you used to build the company in the first place. You can start over, just like you told me to start a bakery." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. She handed it to him. "What is this?" Arthur asked. "A severance package," Isabella said. "It's enough for first and last month's rent on a studio apartment in Queens, and a bus pass." Arthur stared at the envelope. It was the exact amount he had offered her the night he kicked her out. The irony tasted like ash in his mouth. "And my son?" Arthur asked, his voice trembling. "Can I see Leo?" Isabella's expression hardened. "Leo is a sterling. He is surrounded by family who cherish him. When he is 18, I will tell him the truth about his father. Until then, you are a stranger to him. You chose your path, Arthur. Walk it." She tapped on the partition glass. The driver nodded. "Get out, Arthur." Arthur stepped out of the car onto the busy street. The limousine pulled away, disappearing into the traffic, taking his past, his future, and his heart with it. The radiators in the studio apartment in Astoria hissed and banged, a metallic symphony that kept Arthur awake most nights. It had been 6 months since the collapse. The generous settlement Isabella had given him, the exact amount he had once offered her, had evaporated faster than he anticipated. Security deposits, utility setup fees, and the sheer cost of existing in New York without a corporate expense account had drained him. Arthur Pendleton, the man who had once graced the cover of Forbes as a visionary under 30, was now sitting on a second-hand mattress, staring at a stain on the ceiling that looked suspiciously like the shape of the Manhattan Island he had been exiled from. He had tried to get back into the game. In the first few weeks, he had called in favors. He dialed the private numbers of venture capitalists he had made rich, board members he had vacationed with in Saint-Tropez, and tech editors who had called him a genius. The responses were uniform. "Arthur, you're toxic," one former investor told him bluntly. "It's not just that you lost the company. It's how you lost it. You tried to hustle the Sterling family. You publicly humiliated a pregnant woman who turned out to be the most powerful heiress in the industrial sector. No one will touch you. You're a liability. When the calls stopped being answered, Arthur tried to apply for mid-level management jobs. He was rejected for being overqualified, or more often, simply ghosted. By month 4, the hunger was real. Not the metaphorical hunger for success he used to preach about in TED Talks, but the gnawing physical ache of an empty stomach. He sold his remaining bespoke suits to a consignment shop for pennies on the dollar. He sold the Rolex. Finally, he walked into a chain auto repair shop in Queens. The manager, a burly man named Frank with grease permanently etched into his fingerprints, looked at Arthur's soft hands and skeptical expression. "I know engines," Arthur said, his voice void of its old arrogance. "I built the software that optimizes fuel injection for half the luxury cars on the market. I can change oil. I can rotate tires. I just need a job." Frank hired him, not as a manager, but as a lube tech level 1. Minimum wage. Arthur, now just Artie to his co-workers, spent his days in a pit under dirty sedans, hot oil dripping onto his safety goggles. It was grueling, back-breaking work. But in the rhythmic turning of wrenches, Arthur found a strange, numbing peace. There were no board meetings, there were no lies, there was just a broken machine, and he fixed it. While Arthur scraped grease from his fingernails, Isabella Sterling was reshaping the skyline. The acquisition of Pendleton Tech had been seamless. She didn't destroy Arthur's work, she perfected it. She integrated his Nexus AI with Sterling Steel's global logistics network, creating the most efficient supply chain system in history. The stock price didn't just recover, it tripled. But Isabella's greatest project wasn't the company. It was Leo. Leo was now 5 years old. He was a bright, curious boy with unruly dark hair and a laugh that could light up the gloomiest boardroom. Isabella made sure his life wasn't just nannies and private drivers. She took him to the park. She read to him every night. She ensured he knew he was loved not for what he would inherit, but for who he was. Conrad Sterling, having formally retired to the Swiss Alps, visited often. The Iron Wolf had melted into a doting grandfather who let Leo put stickers on his expensive Italian loafers. "He asks about his father," Isabella said one evening, standing on the balcony of her new estate in the Hamptons. The ocean breeze was cool, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the city. Beside her stood Dr. Lucas Bennett. Lucas wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a CEO. He was the chief of pediatric surgery at Mount Sinai, a man who spent his days saving children's lives and his weekends volunteering at clinics in the Bronx. He had met Isabella at a charity gala, not realizing who she was until their 3rd date. He treated her with a gentle, steady respect that Arthur had never been capable of. "What do you tell him?" Lucas asked, taking a sip of his wine. "I tell him his father is gone," Isabella said, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I don't lie. Arthur is gone. The man I married doesn't exist anymore. He was a mirage. Leo is smart," Lucas said softly. "One day, he'll look for the man behind the mirage." "I know," Isabella sighed. "But by then, I hope he'll be strong enough to see the truth without it breaking him." Lucas set his glass down and took Isabella's hand. "He has you, and, if you'll have me, he has us." Isabella looked at Lucas. She saw no calculation in his eyes, no ambition to use her name, just love. "Yes," she whispered, "he has us." 2 years later, the grand opening of the Sterling Pendleton Science Center in Manhattan. It was a black tie affair, the kind of event that shut down city blocks. The paparazzi were out in force, their flashbulbs creating a stroboscopic lightning storm. Limousines idled in a line that stretched for 3 avenues. Arthur was working. He had been promoted at the shop, but he took extra shifts on weekends, working for a high-end valet service to save money for a small house he was eyeing in New Jersey. Tonight, he was wearing a red vest and black slacks, standing at the curb, opening doors for the very people who used to attend his parties. He kept his cap pulled low. He grew a beard, grey and coarse, which hid the jawline that had once been famous. No one recognized him. To them, he was just a service drone, invisible and interchangeable. Then, the lead car arrived. A Rolls-Royce Phantom. Arthur stiffened. He knew that car. He knew the license plate. STR-001. He should have swapped places with the other valet. He should have run. But his feet were lead. He stood frozen as the car rolled to a stop in front of him. He reached out and opened the rear door. First came the flash of a camera. Then, a small boy hopped out, wearing a miniature tuxedo and holding a toy robot. Leo. He was 7 now. He looked so much like Arthur that it felt like a punch to the gut. Then, Lucas stepped out, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. Finally, Isabella emerged. She wore emerald green silk, a color that made her look vibrant and alive. She was laughing at something Lucas had said. She looked radiant. She looked complete. "Thank you," she said to the valet, not looking at his face. She handed him a folded bill. Arthur took it. His fingers brushed hers for a fraction of a second. The electric shock of the contact made him flinch. Isabella paused. She stopped laughing. She turned her head slowly, looking at the man in the red vest. Arthur kept his head down, the brim of his cap shading his eyes. "Don't look up," he screamed internally. "Let her go." "Mom! Come on!" Leo shouted, tugging on her hand. "I want to see the robots." Isabella hesitated. She stared at the bearded man. She saw the hands, calloused, stained with oil, rougher than she remembered. But the shape of the knuckles was familiar. She saw the way he held his posture, a shadow of the confidence he once had. "Is everything okay, Bella?" Lucas asked, stepping back toward her. "Yes," Isabella said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at Arthur one last time. In that silence, 1,000 words were spoken. She saw his fall, she saw his punishment, and she saw that he had accepted it. "Just a ghost," she said to Lucas. She turned away and walked up the red carpet, her family flanking her. Arthur let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He looked at the bill in his hand. It was $100. "Hey, buddy!" Leo's voice rang out. Arthur looked up. The boy had run back down the few steps of the carpet. He was standing right in front of Arthur. "You dropped this," Leo said, holding out a ticket stub that had fallen from Arthur's vest pocket. Arthur knelt down. He was eye level with his son. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. The same nose, the same inquisitive brow. "Thank you," Arthur rasped, his voice thick with emotion. Leo tilted his head. "My dad liked robots, too. Mommy says he built the first brain for them." Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. He could say it. He could say, "I'm your dad." He could blow up their world right here, right now. He could try to claim a piece of this glory. He looked past Leo, up the stairs. Isabella was watching him. She wasn't fearful. She was waiting to see if he had actually changed. Arthur looked back at the boy. He saw the happiness in Leo's eyes. He saw the security. He saw a boy who didn't know the pain of abandonment because his mother had shielded him from it. If Arthur claimed him now, he would only bring confusion. He would bring the shame of his current life into Leo's bright world. To love him was to let him go. "Your mum is right," Arthur said, a tear tracing a path through the grease on his cheek. He was a very smart man, but he made a big mistake. "What mistake?" Leo asked innocently. He forgot that the most important part of the machine isn't the brain, Arthur said, tapping his own chest. It's the heart. You make sure you never forget that, okay? Leo nodded solemnly. Okay. Bye, mister. Bye, Leo, Arthur whispered. Leo ran back up the stairs, taking Lucas's hand. The three of them disappeared into the golden light of the gala. That night, Arthur returned to his small house in New Jersey. It was quiet. It was simple, but it was his. He sat at his small kitchen table and pulled out a piece of stationery. He had been meaning to write this for years. Isabella, I won't mail this. I know you don't want to hear from me, and I have no right to intrude on the life you've built. I saw him tonight. He is magnificent. He is everything I never gave myself the time to be. Kind, open, happy. For a long time, I hated you. I hated you for taking my company, for exposing me, for ruining me. I told myself you were vindictive. But tonight, standing on that curb, I realized you didn't ruin me. You saved me. You stripped away the lie I was living. If I had stayed the Arthur Pendleton of 5 years ago, I would have eventually destroyed Leo too. I would have taught him that people are assets, and love is a transaction. You saved him from becoming me. I fix things now, real things, engines that are broken, gears that are ground down. It's honest work. I think, for the first time in my life, I am an honest man. Lucas looks like a good man. Let him be the father Leo deserves. I will stay in the shadows, not as a punishment, but as my final gift to you both. Be happy, Bella. You were always the steel in our dynasty. I just didn't realize it until I tested your strength and broke myself against it. Arthur folded the letter. He didn't put it in an envelope. He didn't look for a stamp. He walked over to the small fireplace in his living room, struck a match, and held it to the corner of the paper. He watched the words curl and blacken, turning into smoke that drifted up the chimney and out into the night sky. He wasn't the billionaire genius anymore. He wasn't the master of the universe. He was just a mechanic who had fixed his own soul, even if it meant he had to lose everything else to do it. Arthur Pendleton went to the window and looked up at the stars. For the first time in years, he slept soundly. Isabella's journey from a discarded wife on a rainy Fifth Avenue sidewalk to the titan of industry was not just a story of revenge. It was a story of revelation. She revealed her true identity, but more importantly, she revealed the true character of everyone around her. Arthur Pendleton learned that value isn't found in stock options or public image. It is found in integrity, loyalty, and the people you hold when the world falls apart. He paid a heavy price for his arrogance, losing the family he could have had. But in his loss, he found a shred of humanity he never possessed when he was rich. This story reminds us that underestimating someone based on their current circumstances is a dangerous game. You never know when the person you cast aside is actually the one holding the keys to the kingdom. Thank you so much for listening to this dramatic saga. It's been a roller coaster of emotions, from heartbreak to triumph. Now, I have a question for you. Do you think Arthur's silent sacrifice at the end redeemed him? Or was it too little, too late? Should he have told Leo the truth? I'm really curious to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment down below. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It helps the algorithm share these stories with more people. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you'll be the first to know when I upload the next drama. Until next time, remember, know your worth and never let anyone treat you like you're penniless when you're sitting on a gold mine. Goodbye.